"Your sister is a marketing powerhouse unlike you," my father Victor announced during brunch, raising his mimosa toward Scarlett. "She doesn't need handouts from anyone." I sat there at the corner table of Portland's most expensive restaurant, feeling the familiar sting of his words. The morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Scarlett's triumphant smile as she basked in Victor's praise. She looked flawless as always, her designer blazer perfectly coordinated with her diamond tennis bracelet. Everything about her screamed executive success. "Scarlett climbed the corporate ladder through pure talent," Victor continued, his voice filled with pride. "Unlike your freelance computer tinkering. Look at her corner office, her company BMW, her executive wardrobe. She's completely self-sufficient." I quietly sipped my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. 18 months of these brunch conversations had taught me to stay silent while Victor celebrated Scarlett's supposed achievements and dismissed my work as worthless internet games. "She's making real money in corporate marketing," he went on. "Not like Morgan sitting at home playing around on websites all day." Scarlett beamed at the comparison. "Thank you, Dad. I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am. It feels amazing to be truly financially independent and successful." I nearly choked on my orange juice. Financially independent. The woman who had texted me frantically just 3 days ago begging for $5,500 for her monthly expenses. "Excellent," I said quietly, setting down my cup. "Then she won't need my $5,500 monthly support anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished cigarette. Scarlett's confident smile disappeared instantly, replaced by a look of pure terror. Victor stopped mid-chew, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "What did you just say?" he asked slowly. I said, "Scarlett won't need my monthly transfers anymore since she's so successful and independent." I kept my voice calm, watching my sister's face drain of all color. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She had spent 18 months building this image of corporate success while secretly living off my earnings. Now her carefully constructed facade was crumbling with just one sentence. "Morgan, we agreed to keep that private," Scarlett whispered desperately, her voice barely audible. "Keep what private?" Victor demanded, looking between us with growing alarm. The restaurant felt charged with tension. I could see Scarlett calculating how much she had to lose if the truth came out. Her entire identity as the successful daughter, the one Victor was proud of, the one who didn't need family help, was about to shatter. This was the moment I had been unconsciously waiting for. 18 months of being dismissed, 18 months of watching Scarlett take credit for a lifestyle I was funding, 18 months of Victor's constant criticism of my work. The golden child was about to fall from her pedestal and I was the one holding the rope. "My name is Morgan Evans and I'm 34 years old. For the past 6 years, I've been running a successful digital marketing agency from my converted bedroom office in downtown Portland. While my family sees me as an underachiever who plays around on computers, I've quietly built an empire helping e-commerce brands optimize their online presence. My agency, Cascade Digital Solutions, started small but has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I specialize in conversion rate optimization, pay-per-click advertising, and social media strategy for outdoor recreation brands. My clients include some of the biggest names in camping gear, hiking equipment, and adventure travel. Last year alone, I generated $1.2 million in revenue. My profit margins are exceptional, and my client retention rate consistently exceeds 95%. The irony isn't lost on me. While Victor dismisses my computer tinkering, I make more in a month than most executives see in a year. But I've always been private about my success. I dress casually, drive a reliable Subaru Outback, and live modestly in a one-bedroom apartment. Money has never been about status for me. Scarlett, on the other hand, has always been about appearances. At 30, she works as a junior marketing coordinator at a small wellness brand called Pure Pacific, earning around $38,000 annually. It's an entry-level position, but hardly the executive role Victor believes she holds. 18 months ago, Scarlett came to me in tears. She had racked up enormous credit card debt trying to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The downtown loft she was renting was bleeding her dry. Her BMW lease payments were astronomical and she was drowning in designer purchases she had made to keep up with her wealthy friends from college. "I'll pay you back with interest, I promise," she had begged. "I just need help until my next promotion comes through. I can't let Dad know I'm struggling financially." Being the older sister, I felt protective. I agreed to transfer $5,500 monthly to cover her shortfalls with the understanding that it would be temporary. Scarlett promised she would use the time to get her finances in order and eventually become truly independent. Instead, she used my money to fund an even more extravagant lifestyle. She moved to a luxury loft in the Pearl District, bought expensive clothes, and started posting constantly on social media about her successful marketing career. She convinced our extended family that she was climbing the corporate ladder while carefully hiding the truth about where her money really came from. Meanwhile, Victor continued his pattern of comparing us during every family gathering. He would praise Scarlett's independence and business acumen while dismissing my work as a hobby. He genuinely believed that Scarlett's marketing coordinator position was more valuable than my thriving digital agency. "Morgan needs to get a real job," he would say to relatives. "Scarlett is the responsible one. She's making something of herself in the corporate world." The worst part was watching Scarlett nod along with these comparisons, never once acknowledging that her entire lifestyle was subsidized by the sister Victor constantly criticized. She had become comfortable with the lie, comfortable with letting me fund her image while taking all the credit. Today's brunch was supposed to be another celebration of Scarlett's latest fake promotion at work. Instead, it was about to become the morning when the truth finally came out. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Victor set down his fork and stared at me with the expression he usually reserved for discussing my disappointing life choices. "Morgan, explain what you mean by monthly transfers," he said slowly. Scarlett shot me a desperate look across the table. "Dad, it's not what it sounds like," she began, but her voice lacked conviction. $5,500, I repeated clearly, every month for the past 18 months. $99,000 total to cover Scarlett's rent, car payments, credit cards, and shopping habits. Victor's face went through several color changes, from confusion to disbelief to something approaching anger. "That's impossible. Scarlett makes excellent money in her senior marketing position. She makes $38,000 a year coordinating social media posts for a wellness company," I said matter-of-factly. "Which is a perfectly respectable salary, but not nearly enough to support the lifestyle she's been living." "Morgan, please stop," Scarlett whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. But I was done protecting her image. Her luxury loft costs $3,200 a month. Her BMW lease is $750. Add in utilities, insurance, credit card minimums, and daily expenses, and she's been short about $5,500 monthly to maintain the standard of living Dad has been praising. Victor looked at Scarlett with growing horror. "Is this true?" Scarlett's carefully applied makeup was starting to run as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I was going to pay her back. I just needed time to get established in my career." "Established in what?" Victor demanded. "You told me you were promoted to senior director last month. You said you're managing a team of 12 people. I coordinate content for 3 junior associates," Scarlett admitted quietly. "It's not really management." The truth was finally spilling out. For 18 months, Scarlett had been crafting elaborate stories about her career advancement, creating fictional promotions and salary increases that existed only in her imagination and Victor's proud retellings to friends and neighbors. "So while I've been telling everyone how successful you are, how independent you are, you've been living off your sister's charity." Victor's voice was rising, causing other diners to glance our way. "It wasn't charity," Scarlett protested weakly. "It was a loan. A loan with no repayment terms, no interest, and no end date," I corrected. "A loan you never mentioned when you were letting Dad use me as a cautionary tale about responsibility and success." Victor turned to me with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't his usual disappointment or dismissive irritation. It was something closer to shame. "How much money do you actually make with your computer work?" he asked quietly. I had never planned to reveal this information, but the moment seemed right. Last year, I grossed $1.2 million through my digital marketing agency. After expenses and taxes, I cleared about $480,000. The number hit Victor like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Scarlett was crying openly now, realizing that her secret was completely exposed, and her image as the successful daughter was permanently destroyed. Victor's mimosa glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against his breakfast plate. The sound echoed through our suddenly too quiet section of the restaurant as he processed what I had just revealed. $1.2 million, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That's gross revenue, I clarified. My net profit was around $480,000, but yes. Scarlett was hyperventilating at the other end of the table. Morgan, you can't cut me off now. My rent is due in 3 days. I have credit card payments, car insurance, my gym membership, my salon appointments. Maybe you should have thought about that before spending 18 months letting Dad believe you were more successful than me, I replied calmly, pulling out my phone. I'm canceling the automatic transfer right now. My fingers moved across the banking app with practiced ease. With a few taps, I deleted the recurring $5,500 monthly transfer that had been funding Scarlett's fake lifestyle. There, I said, showing her the screen. Transfer cancelled. Victor was staring at me like I had grown a second head. You make more in a year than I made as a corporate attorney in 3 years, and you've been sitting here letting me lecture you about responsibility and career success. You never asked about my income, I pointed out. You just assumed that because I work from home, I must be unsuccessful. Scarlett suddenly stood up, her chair scraping against the restaurant's polished concrete floor. Dad, you have to make her keep helping me. I'll lose my apartment, my car, everything. Sit down, Scarlett, Victor said sharply, his tone cutting through her panic. You've been lying to me for 18 months. I wasn't lying exactly, she protested. I was just managing the narrative. Managing the narrative? Victor's voice dripped with disgust. You told me last month that you got a $25,000 bonus for exceeding quarterly targets. Scarlett's face crumpled. I knew you'd be disappointed if you found out I was struggling financially. So instead, you let me believe Morgan was the family disappointment while she was literally paying for your life. Victor stood up, his own chair joining the chaos. Do you have any idea how many times I've told people that Morgan needs to get her act together? How many times I've used Scarlett as an example of what Morgan should aspire to be? The irony was almost funny. While Victor was holding up Scarlett as the model of success and independence, she had been entirely dependent on my financial support. Every designer outfit he praised, every luxury he admired, every achievement he celebrated had been purchased with money from my supposedly worthless business. Morgan, I need you to reconsider, Scarlett pleaded, moving around the table toward me. I'll pay you back with interest. I'll get a second job. I'll do whatever you want. What I want, I said, standing up to face her, is for you to stop pretending to be something you're not. What I want is for Dad to stop using you as proof that I'm a failure. What I want is honesty. Scarlett's perfectly styled facade was cracking. Her expensive makeup was streaking down her face, and her designer blazer was wrinkled from stress. For the first time in years, she looked like what she actually was, a 30-year-old marketing coordinator living far beyond her means. But Dad thinks I'm successful, she whispered desperately. Dad thought you were successful, I corrected. Now he knows the truth. Victor was pacing the length of our dining area, running his hands through his graying hair. 18 months, he muttered. 18 months of bragging about Scarlett's corporate climb while dismissing Morgan's business as a hobby. It's not a hobby when it pays better than most Fortune 500 executives, I said quietly. He stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been respect. What exactly do you do in this digital marketing business? I help e-commerce brands optimize their online sales, I replied. Conversion rate optimization, paid advertising management, social media strategy. I have clients across the outdoor recreation industry who trust me to manage their digital presence and drive revenue growth. Victor blinked slowly. And this generates over $1 million annually. More some years, less others, but consistently profitable. Yes. Scarlett was still crying, but now her tears had taken on a different quality. These weren't tears of panic about being discovered. These were tears of genuine grief for the life she was about to lose. I need specifics about your business, Victor said, settling back into his chair with a new intensity. I want to understand exactly what I've been dismissing all these years. Scarlett looked between us with growing desperation. She was realizing that Victor's attention had completely shifted away from her crisis and toward understanding my success. I started Cascade Digital Solutions 6 years ago, I began. I noticed that most outdoor brands were terrible at digital marketing. They had amazing products but couldn't effectively reach their target customers online. Victor leaned forward, actually listening to me for perhaps the first time in my adult life. So I researched the industry, learned everything I could about their customer behavior, and started offering specialized services. Conversion rate optimization, targeted advertising campaigns, email marketing automation, social media strategy. And people actually pay you for this? Victor asked. Dad, digital marketing is a massive industry, I explained. E-commerce brands spend billions of dollars annually trying to reach customers online. The problem is that most agencies focus on big corporations or treat small brands like afterthoughts. I target mid-sized outdoor companies that need enterprise-level strategy but can't afford massive agency fees. Scarlett was scrolling frantically through her phone, probably calculating her monthly expenses and realizing how quickly her world was about to collapse. My average client pays between $8,000 and $15,000 monthly for comprehensive digital marketing management, I continued. I currently have 12 active clients, plus project-based work that brings in additional revenue. Victor was doing math in his head. 12 clients times $10,000 average is $120,000 monthly, times 12 months is $1.44 million in gross revenue. That's been my peak performance, I clarified. Last year's numbers were more typical at $1.2 million, but yes, the scale is substantial. The magnitude of my business was finally sinking in. Victor had spent years treating me like an unemployed college graduate playing video games in my apartment when I was actually running a multi-million-dollar operation. Where do you work from? He asked. My apartment has a dedicated office space, but most of my work is done digitally. I manage client campaigns, analyze performance data, create marketing strategies, and coordinate with their internal teams. Everything is remote, which keeps my overhead low and allows me to serve clients nationwide. Scarlett suddenly looked up from her phone with panic in her eyes. Morgan, my credit card minimum payments alone are $2,200 a month. Without your transfers, I can't even make the minimums. Maybe you shouldn't have bought so much designer clothing, I suggested. Or maybe you should have been honest about your situation instead of building a lie that required constant financial support. But what am I supposed to tell people? Scarlett wailed. Everyone thinks I'm successful. My Instagram has 25,000 followers who follow my executive lifestyle content. Tell them the truth, Victor said harshly. Tell them you've been living a lie funded by the sister you and I both dismissed as unsuccessful. The weight of the revelation was clearly affecting him. Every conversation we had ever had about my career was being recontextualized. Every time he had criticized my work choices, every time he had held up Scarlett as an example, every time he had suggested I get a real job was now revealed as ignorant and hurtful. I need to call your Aunt Vivienne, Victor said suddenly. Why? Scarlett asked with dread. Because last week I told her that Morgan should follow Scarlett's example and find a traditional corporate position. I told her that Scarlett's marketing executive role was proof that traditional employment was more stable than entrepreneurship. My Aunt Vivienne, Victor's sister, was a successful tech entrepreneur who had always been supportive of my unconventional career path. She had probably held her tongue when Victor made those comments, but she must have known how misguided his perspective was. Scarlett was spiraling into full panic mode. She had pulled out her laptop and was frantically searching for apartments she could actually afford on her retail salary. Look at this, she said, showing us a studio apartment listing. 450 square feet for $1,800 a month, and it doesn't even have in-unit laundry. Welcome to living within your means, I replied without sympathy. Victor was still processing the business details. Morgan, when you said you work from home, I pictured you in pajamas browsing social media. I never imagined you were running a legitimate operation with clients and revenue. That's because you never asked, I pointed out. Every time I tried to explain what I do, you would interrupt with advice about getting a traditional job. He had the decency to look ashamed. I thought I was helping. I thought I was encouraging you to be more like Scarlett. More like Scarlett, I repeated. You mean more like someone who lies about their income, lives entirely on credit, and depends on family handouts while pretending to be independent? Scarlett slammed her laptop shut. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Morgan. I was just trying to make Dad proud. By using me as the family disappointment while living off my success. The anger I had been suppressing for 18 months was finally coming out. Do you know how many family gatherings I've sat through listening to lectures about responsibility and work ethic while funding your entire lifestyle? Victor walked to the restaurant's window overlooking the Willamette River. I owe you an apology, Morgan. A massive apology. It's not just about apologizing, I said. It's about recognizing that your assumptions about success and failure were completely wrong. Scarlett's traditional job title impressed you more than my actual financial achievement. But her position seemed more, he paused, searching for the right word. More respectable? I suggested. More like what you understand? He nodded reluctantly. That's the problem, Dad. You valued the appearance of success over actual success. Scarlett had a corporate-sounding title and wore business clothes, so you assumed she was thriving. I work from home in comfortable clothes, so you assumed I was failing. Scarlett was crying again, but this time the tears seemed more genuine. I never wanted it to go this far. I thought I would get promoted or find a higher paying position and eventually be able to stop needing your help. For 18 months? I asked skeptically. I kept thinking next quarter would be better, or next year. I kept thinking something would change. The only thing that changed was your spending, I pointed out. Instead of using my support to get stable, you used it to justify spending even more. Victor returned to the table and sat down heavily. What happens now? Now Scarlett figures out how to live on her actual salary, I said. And maybe both of you stop treating my career like a cute hobby that I'll eventually outgrow. And what about the money Scarlett owes you? Victor asked. I had been thinking about this question for months. I consider it an expensive lesson. I'm not expecting repayment, but I'm also not providing any more support. Scarlett looked up with hope in her eyes. So you're not angry about the money? I'm angry about the lying, I clarified. I'm angry about being used as the family cautionary tale while funding the very lifestyle Dad was praising you for. The money was my choice to give, but the deception wasn't acceptable. Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Morgan, I would like to learn more about your business. Not to criticize or suggest changes, but because I clearly don't understand what you've accomplished, and I'd like to. For the first time all morning, I smiled. 6 weeks later, I sat in my home office, watching my bank account grow instead of shrink by $5,500. The money I had been sending to Scarlett was now being reinvested into expanding my agency internationally, and the results were already showing. Scarlett had moved into a modest studio apartment 20 minutes from her job. She had sold most of her designer clothing and jewelry to cover her credit card payments, and I had heard through Victor that she was working weekend shifts at a local coffee shop to make ends meet. The most satisfying part wasn't watching Scarlett struggle with reality. It was watching Victor come to terms with how wrong he had been about both of us. He had called me every few days since our brunch confrontation, asking detailed questions about my business operations. Not critical questions or suggestions for improvement, but genuine curiosity about how I had built something successful while he was dismissing it as worthless. I told Vivienne about your real revenue numbers, he admitted during one of our calls. She laughed at me for 20 minutes straight. Aunt Vivienne always knew you were underestimating me, I replied. She said she tried to tell me several times, but I wouldn't listen. Victor's voice carried a weight of regret. She said I was being an arrogant fool who couldn't recognize success because it didn't look like what I expected. That sounded exactly like something Vivienne would say. She had never been shy about calling out family members when they were being ridiculous. The worst part, Victor continued, is realizing how many people I told that Scarlett was the responsible one and you needed to get your act together. I was bragging about her corporate success to everyone at the country club. And now you have to figure out how to explain that everything you said was wrong, I observed. That the daughter you were criticizing was actually more successful than you ever dreamed, and the daughter you were praising was living in a fantasy funded by her sister's generosity. The reversal was complete. Victor's entire understanding of his daughters had been flipped upside down, and he was struggling to reconcile his assumptions with reality. The most dramatic consequence came when Scarlett's carefully constructed social media presence began to crumble. She had built an enormous following by posting photos of her luxury lifestyle, her designer outfits, and her expensive apartment. Her Instagram feed had become central to her identity, showcasing what appeared to be the perfect life of a successful young marketing executive. Without my financial support, that content stream dried up immediately. She could no longer afford the designer pieces that had been central to her online image. Her luxury loft was gone, replaced by a modest studio that didn't photograph well for social media. Her expensive dinners and shopping trips became memories. Her followers began to notice. Comments on her posts shifted from admiration to concern. "Where have you been? Are you okay? Your content has really changed lately." Scarlett tried to maintain the facade for a few weeks, posting throwback photos and recycling older content, but eventually people started asking direct questions about her apparent lifestyle change. The final blow came when one of her former college friends, someone she had probably bragged to about her corporate success, commented publicly asking about the big promotion she had mentioned but that never seemed to have materialized. Scarlett's social media presence, which had been built entirely on the lie of her financial success, became impossible to maintain once the truth was revealed. She eventually made her accounts private and stopped posting altogether. Meanwhile, Victor had begun telling people the truth about my business success. It was awkward for him, having to explain that he had been wrong about both of his daughters for years, but he seemed committed to making up for his mistakes by giving me the recognition I had earned. "I'm proud of what you built," he told me during one of our conversations. "I'm ashamed that I couldn't see it when it was right in front of me." Those words meant more to me than all the money I had ever made. 3 months after the brunch revelation, the full consequences of Scarlett's deception had become clear. Her transition back to reality proved more brutal than anyone had anticipated. Within 30 days of losing my financial support, she had been forced to break her lease and forfeit her security deposit. The luxury loft that had been central to her image was repossessed, and she barely managed to salvage her personal belongings before the eviction. Her BMW was voluntarily surrendered to avoid repossession fees, leaving her dependent on Portland's public transportation system. The designer wardrobe that had been essential to her corporate image was sold piece by piece through consignment shops and online marketplaces. Most devastating was the collapse of her social media empire. Her 25,000 Instagram followers had been attracted to her aspirational lifestyle content. When that content disappeared, so did her engagement. Followers began unfollowing in droves as her posts shifted from luxury showcases to desperate attempts to maintain relevance. Former friends who had admired her seemingly glamorous lifestyle began to distance themselves once they realized her success had been entirely fabricated. The exclusive social circle she had cultivated through expensive dinners and designer events evaporated when she could no longer participate financially. Dating became particularly complicated. Potential partners who had been attracted to the affluent marketing executive portrayed in her online presence were confused and disappointed when they met the reality: a junior coordinator living in a studio apartment and riding the bus to work. Victor faced his own social embarrassment when family members and neighbors learned that he had spent months criticizing his actually successful daughter while praising the one who had been living on borrowed money and borrowed time. The country club conversations became particularly awkward. Victor had to explain to friends that his understanding of his daughter's success had been completely reversed. The daughter he had dismissed as irresponsible was actually more financially successful than anyone at their social gatherings. I heard from Aunt Vivienne that you're expanding internationally, Victor said during one of our weekly calls, which had become a new tradition since the revelation. I'm opening a European division, I confirmed. Working with outdoor brands in Germany and Scandinavia. The market for digital marketing services in the outdoor industry is enormous over there. Vivienne says you're considering hiring employees. The business has reached a scale where I need additional team members. I'm looking at bringing on specialists in paid advertising, conversion optimization, and client management. The growth trajectory of Cascade Digital Solutions had accelerated dramatically once I stopped hemorrhaging $5,500 monthly to support Scarlett's lifestyle. The recovered funds allowed me to invest in advanced marketing tools, expand my service offerings, and pursue larger clients. Victor's voice carried genuine curiosity. Would you consider hiring Scarlett? Not as charity, but if she actually has relevant skills? That was an interesting question. Scarlett did have a marketing background, even if her position was more junior than she had portrayed. But the trust issues were significant. She would need to prove she could be honest about her capabilities and work ethic, I said. And she would need to start at an entry-level position appropriate to her actual experience. Victor was quiet for a moment. She's been working on rebuilding her life. She got a second job at a coffee shop to help with expenses. She's been attending financial counseling sessions. That's good to hear, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I wanted Scarlett to succeed. I just wanted it to be based on reality instead of deception. The most significant change came in my relationship with Victor. For the first time in my adult life, he was treating me as an equal. Our conversations shifted from his lectures about responsibility to genuine discussions about business strategy and market opportunities. He had begun reading about digital marketing, trying to understand the industry he had dismissed for so long. He asked thoughtful questions about my client acquisition strategies, my competitive advantages, and my long-term growth plans. I think I understand now why Vivienne always defended your career choices, he said during one conversation. She could see that you were building something substantial while I was focused on superficial markers of success. Aunt Vivienne had indeed been vindicated. She had tried multiple times to explain to Victor that my work was legitimate and profitable, but he had dismissed her perspective as biased toward non-traditional careers. When Victor finally called to apologize to Vivienne, she was characteristically direct in her response. I told you Morgan was more successful than you realized, but you were too stubborn to listen. Now you know what happens when you judge people based on appearances instead of results. 6 months after the brunch confrontation, I received an unexpected call from Scarlett. Her voice was different, less entitled, more genuine. Morgan, I wanted to thank you, she said. That wasn't what I had expected to hear. Thank me for what? For cutting me off. For forcing me to face reality. For making me stop living a lie. She explained that the financial crisis had forced her to confront not just her spending habits, but the underlying issues that had driven her need for validation and status. She had begun therapy to address what she now understood was a compulsive need to appear successful regardless of the cost. I realize now that I was addicted to the image of success more than I cared about actual achievement, she continued. I was so focused on looking like I was thriving that I never bothered to actually build the skills or career that would make me truly successful. The bankruptcy had been devastating but educational. Scarlett had been forced to learn about budgeting, debt management, and living within her means. More importantly, she had started focusing on actual career development instead of just maintaining appearances. I applied for a marketing specialist position at a larger company, she told me. It's only a $10,000 salary increase, but it's legitimate growth based on real skills, not fabricated achievements. That's genuinely good news, I said, and I meant it. I was wondering, she continued hesitantly, if you might consider giving me a reference. Not as my sister, but as someone who understands digital marketing. I've been studying everything I can about the industry, and I think I could be genuinely valuable to the right company. It was a reasonable request. Despite our complicated history, Scarlett had always been intelligent and capable when she applied herself honestly. Send me your resume and a portfolio of any work you've done, I said. If the quality is there, I'll provide an honest reference based on your actual skills. The transformation in our family dynamics continued to evolve over the following months. Victor's new understanding of my success led him to become one of my biggest advocates, enthusiastically telling friends and neighbors about my business achievements. The irony was striking. For years, I had craved his recognition and approval. Now that I finally had it, I realized that his opinion mattered less than I had imagined. Building a successful business had given me confidence in my own worth that didn't depend on external validation. Victor's relationship with Scarlett became more complex. He was simultaneously disappointed in her deception and proud of her efforts to rebuild her life honestly. Their conversations shifted from celebrations of fake achievements to discussions about real goals and authentic progress. The extended family dynamics were perhaps the most interesting to observe. Relatives who had spent years hearing Victor's comparisons between his daughters had to completely readjust their understanding of both Scarlett and me. Aunt Vivienne became an unofficial mentor, sharing her experiences as a female entrepreneur and offering advice about scaling my business. She had always believed in my potential, and Victor's reversal finally allowed her to openly support my career without family conflict. Uncle Harrison, Victor's brother, admitted that he had always suspected something was off about Scarlett's lifestyle. As a banker, he understood financial ratios and had noticed that her spending patterns didn't align with typical salaries in her supposed position. The most rewarding development was when Victor asked if he could visit my office and see my operation firsthand. It was the first time he had ever shown genuine interest in my work environment. I gave him a tour of my converted bedroom office, showed him client campaign dashboards, explained my project management systems, and walked him through case studies of successful campaigns I had managed. "This is more sophisticated than some corporate marketing departments I've seen," he admitted, examining my multi-monitor setup and campaign analytics. "It has to be," I explained. "My clients trust me to deliver results that justify their investment. If I can't prove ROI, I lose the business." Victor spent 2 hours in my office, asking questions about everything from client acquisition to financial planning. By the end of his visit, he had a complete understanding of why my business was successful and sustainable. "I owe you more than an apology," he said as he prepared to leave. "I owe you years of recognition and respect that I withheld because I didn't understand what you were building." 1 year after the brunch revelation, both Scarlett and I had settled into new versions of ourselves. She had successfully landed the marketing specialist position she had applied for and was slowly rebuilding her financial stability. Her social media presence had evolved from fabricated luxury to authentic professional development content. More importantly, she had learned to find satisfaction in genuine achievements rather than manufactured appearances. Her apartment was modest but comfortable, her wardrobe was professional but affordable, and her lifestyle reflected her actual income rather than borrowed luxury. I had expanded Cascade Digital Solutions into a full-service agency with 4 employees and clients across 3 countries. The business growth that had been constrained by my monthly transfers to Scarlett had exploded once those funds were redirected into legitimate investments. Victor's transformation was perhaps the most significant. He had become genuinely interested in entrepreneurship and digital business, often calling to discuss industry trends or share articles he had read about e-commerce marketing. Most importantly, our family gatherings had evolved from comparison sessions to collaborative conversations. Victor no longer used one daughter to criticize the other. Instead, he celebrated each of our achievements based on their actual merit. The evening that crystallized this change came during our first family dinner since the brunch confrontation. Victor had insisted on hosting at his house, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely welcome. "I want to make a toast," Victor announced, raising his wine glass. "To Morgan, whose business success I failed to recognize, and to Scarlett, whose courage in rebuilding her life I deeply admire." It wasn't the toast I had imagined receiving a year earlier, but it was infinitely more meaningful because it was based on truth rather than fabrication. Scarlett raised her glass with a genuine smile. "To sisters who support each other, even when it's complicated." As I raised my own glass, I realized that the most valuable outcome of this entire ordeal wasn't the money I had recovered or even the recognition I had finally received. It was the authenticity that had replaced the pretense in our family relationships. The 18 months of financial support had cost me $99,000, but the lessons learned were worth far more. Scarlett had discovered that genuine success was more sustainable than fabricated achievement. Victor had learned that his assumptions about career value were outdated and harmful. And I had learned that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's recognition or approval. 2 years later, as I prepared to move Cascade Digital Solutions into a proper office space in Portland's tech corridor, I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamics had evolved since that revelatory brunch. Scarlett had been promoted twice at her marketing firm, earning increases based on legitimate performance rather than fabricated achievements. Her salary had grown to $52,000, and she was managing her finances responsibly for the first time in her adult life. Most importantly, she had rebuilt her self-worth around actual accomplishments rather than borrowed luxury. Her social media presence had transformed into something more authentic and valuable. Instead of posting about fake executive achievements, she shared content about financial recovery, career development, and authentic success. Her follower count had dropped to 8,000, but her engagement was higher because her content was genuine. Victor had become one of my most enthusiastic supporters, regularly referring potential clients to my agency and proudly explaining my business model to anyone who would listen. The father who had once dismissed my work as computer tinkering now understood that I had built something more substantial than many traditional corporations. The most profound change was in my own perspective. For years, I had allowed Victor's disapproval to make me feel insecure about my unconventional career path. The success of my business was satisfying, but his recognition had seemed even more important. Now I understood that external validation, while pleasant, was never the true measure of success. Building Cascade Digital Solutions had given me financial independence, creative fulfillment, and the satisfaction of helping other businesses grow. Those rewards were inherent to the work itself, not dependent on anyone else's approval. The day I signed the lease for my new office space, Victor called to congratulate me. It was a milestone neither of us could have imagined 2 years earlier when he was still dismissing my work as a hobby. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Morgan," he said. "But more than that, I'm grateful you never gave up on your vision, even when I couldn't see its value." As I hung up the phone and looked around my new office space, 2,000 square feet in a building full of successful tech companies, I realized that the best revenge had indeed been success itself. Not the dramatic revelation at brunch, not watching Scarlett face consequences, but simply continuing to build something meaningful while others doubted its worth. The golden child had fallen, but more importantly, the underestimated child had risen. And in the end, that rise was built on substance rather than appearance, truth rather than deception, and authentic achievement rather than borrowed success. The story of our family's transformation had become a reminder that success comes in many forms, but the most sustainable version is always built on honesty, hard work, and the courage to pursue your vision regardless of others' expectations. Scarlett's fall from grace had been painful but necessary. Victor's recognition had been delayed but genuine. And my own journey had proven that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply succeeding on your own terms while others are looking the other way. In the end, the truth had spoken louder than all the lies that once defined us, and our family was stronger for having faced that truth together, even when it shattered everything we thought we knew about each other. The monthly transfers had stopped, but something much more valuable had begun: honest relationships built on genuine understanding rather than false assumptions. And that, I realized, was worth far more than the $99,000 I had spent learning the difference between authentic success and its expensive imitation.